Okay, I'm going to be turning the mic over now to our distinguished professor of psychology, Dr. Christopher France.
Thank you, Rox. All right, thanks, folks. I guess that was my introduction. I don't have to say anything more than that. I'm Chris France. I'm in the psychology department here at OU, and I'm going to be talking to you today about one of my primary research interests, which is trying to help recruit and retain volunteer blood donors. And for those of you, we did a little bit of advertising. For those of you who've thought about giving blood and maybe have a little bit of trepidation, a little nervousness, and hopefully today what you're going to hear is going to give you a little more motivation, a little more confidence to give it a shot. So that's what we're going to walk our way through today. So that's the purpose of this title here. I'd like to give blood, but ... I'm going to start with some basic facts about blood donation, and then I'm going to move into kind of talking about the specifics of ways in which you can make your experience more pleasant if you want to give it a shot. So just general eligibility requirements. If you think about eligibility for giving whole blood, these are the primary requirements. There are a lot of things that come in addition to this, but the primary requirements are that you're generally in good health and that you're at least 17 years of age. So that's going to be fine for everybody in this room. You weigh at least 110 pounds, and that you haven't donated within the last 8 weeks. So you can donate every 8 weeks. So if you've given within the last 8 weeks, you've got to wait a little bit longer. Sure, and I'd be happy to have questions as we go through. So thank you, Rox. So as I say, 17 or 16 in some states. So the issue is that our population, as you probably know, is aging as a whole, right? We're becoming older as a population. And to try and adjust for the fact that our population is aging and therefore we're going to have fewer donors as we go forward, but also our donor pool, people who are primary donors now, are moving into the age where they're more likely to be blood donation recipients, blood transfusion recipients. Blood collection agencies have done a wonderful job of trying to compensate for this by trying to enhance the number of younger donors we get. And one of the ways they've done that was to try and make it so that more and more younger donors were eligible. And so now we're at a point where in many states, if you're 17, you could donate without parental consent. And in some states, the laws have been changed so you can donate blood at 16 years of age, even without parental consent, which is a really interesting thing. It's a medical procedure, but someone who's not an adult can consent on their own to give blood. So these changes have been made to try and enhance the donor pool, to make it easier. So Ohio is one of the states where at 16 years of age you can donate blood with parental consent. So to set this up a little bit, why should you give blood? Why would I be here trying to encourage people to give blood? Well, one of the first reasons or answers to that is that there's a constant demand for blood. In the US, about every 2 seconds, somebody needs a transfusion. And if you add that up across the year, that results in about 14 million units of blood are being transfused in the country every year. So we're talking about a very, very big demand. So constant demand for blood. And on the supply side, there are issues as well. We have a limited supply. About 5% of the population are giving blood every year. All right, so about 1 in 20 people are choosing to give blood as a volunteer every year. And it's important to note that volunteers are the only source of blood, right? So you might hear in the media sometimes about manufactured blood products, and there might be different ways to provide blood that's based on genetic engineering, et cetera. The reality is there is no product right now that can be used that substitutes for volunteer blood, so we need it. And it's important to note that all blood donations have a limited shelf life. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the shelf life in the next few slides, but the reality is even if you give blood today, the blood product, much of what you've given, may not be usable in about 8 weeks from now because it's a natural substance. Your body's producing it, and over time it won't be effective, even though we store some of it frozen, some of it refrigerated, et cetera. Yes?
I'm curious, would you mind asking the audience how many of them have donated blood?
I would like to ask that question, but I will. It's coming up. Okay. Exactly. It's a good question. Who's going to benefit from blood donation? So as I said, that there's a constant demand, and we need the supply. Who's going to benefit? Well, you can benefit. You'll see this on advertisements for blood donation. You can say you can save up to 3 lives with a blood donation, and that's true. And you might have asked yourself, how is it that my single blood donation can actually contribute to the saving 3 different lives? And the answer is that when you donate blood, that blood is spun down into its component parts. All right? So blood will be spun down so that we get out of that, we can get plasma, we can get white blood cells and platelets, and we'll get red blood cells. And let me say a little bit about those, and then I'll show you where they're used. Not sure how much mic I have here. All right, cool. So plasma, which represents about 55% of what's spun down, is mostly water, but contains some very important proteins. So gamma globulin will help boost immunity for people who receive it. Antihemophilic factor will help enhance clotting for people who need that kind of medical help. And when we take the blood and spin it down and get the plasma out of it, that plasma product will be frozen and can be stored for up to a year. So it can still be stored, and used up to a year later. Red blood cells are also going to be coming out of this process of the blood, of the processing of the blood. And blood cells, as you probably are aware, are used in transfusions for medical patients, surgical patients. It's used in cases of people who have had accidents and need emergency treatment. And that product can be refrigerated and stored for up to 42 days. All right, so you're getting the sense already now that there's a shelf life there for the red blood cells, and that's why there's this constant need for blood. Then we get to the last product, platelets. So platelets can be transfused and used in a variety of ways for different types of surgery. Leukemia patients will often need platelet transfusions. And platelets can be only stored and reused for up to 5 days, or used for up to 5 days. And they're stored at room temperature, and they're constantly agitated so that they don't clump, and essentially they're going to be trying to clot, right? So you can see there's this demand, and it's, the supply is going to run out if we don't constantly replace it. This gives you a sense of the types of interventions where blood and blood products will be used across different types of surgeries and accidents, et cetera. And the important point of this slide is to show you that there can be situations where a whole bunch of blood and different products are being used. So for example, somebody's getting a liver transplant, might take up to 6 to 10 units of red blood cells, up to 20 units of plasma, and maybe up to 10 units of platelets. So there's a lot of different product that can be used. In an accident, it might be, in some cases, if you're lucky, your accident, you don't require any blood transfusion, but there are cases where people require 100 or more units of red blood cells. So it can be a very demanding intervention when somebody requires a serious intervention. Yes?
How did you define a unit?
A unit of blood is 450 mils. So when you go and give blood, you're giving 450 mils in that bag that they're storing. They will also take a few extra vials, and those vials are used for the testing that goes on subsequently. So you're giving a little bit more than 450 milliliters of blood, but a unit is 450 mils. All right. Yes?
That makes it sound like whole blood is simply not used.
Whole blood is also used. Yes, yes, and products, and it's separated out. So it can be used as whole blood, it can be used as products.
How long can the whole blood be stored?
What kind of blood?
The whole blood.
It has to be refrigerated, so it's going to have the same refrigerated shelf life.
Just repeat the question.
How long could whole blood be used, stored? And it's the same shelf life as the red units. Yeah. So, I'm going to get to Rox's question about, I'm going to ask you folks about who's donated before. But before I get that, I want to show you something that I think is kind of interesting. It brings it home to this audience. I did a survey in January and February of about 1,000 undergraduates here at Ohio University. And I asked them a very simple question. I asked them, in 1 or 2 words, what feelings do you have when you think of blood donation? All right? And it was an anonymous survey, so they knew that they were going to give me these answers, and it wasn't going to be linked back to them so they could be honest about how they felt about blood donation. And I'm going to put up a very sophisticated analysis called a word cloud. I'm joking, a word cloud is not a sophisticated analysis. Looking at the responses that I received to this survey across these 1,000 or so folks. And for those of you who don't know, what a word cloud does is it takes the responses, and responses that are more common show up as bigger words, and less common show up as smaller words. So you can look here and get a general sense in this picture very quickly about what our undergraduates think about blood donation or how they feel about blood donation. So you can see words like good, helpful, happy, generous, positive, helping. You see these really good, altruistic, positive words showing up. That's how we feel about blood donation. But if you look a little more closely, you see words like nervous. You see needles, scared, scary, right? You start to hone in on those other words. So there's other words that are coming up, but the majority of these words across the board are very positive, the way we feel about blood donation. I also asked these folks to tell me, what's your intention of giving blood in the next 2 months, within the next 2 months? And there was a scale from not at all, like I am not going to do it, to I'm very sure I'm going to give blood. And then I'm going to show you another word cloud that relates to the folks who said, I'm not doing this within the next 2 months. All right? So same people, same task. Here's their word cloud. So you can see the key words that are popping up for people who are saying, I'm not going to do that, are kind of different, right? The key words, the bigger words are scary, fear, anxiety, pain, nervous, fainting. You get some others in there, painful, nausea, queasy. But important to note, you still get positive words, good and helpful. People still see the positive. They understand that it's a good thing to do. But people who are not that interested, when you ask them in a survey of giving blood in the near future, are showing these signs that there's some concerns that they have. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about some of the concerns that people have. I'm going to be talking about ways that we might try and address them to make you more confident. But before I do that, to get to your question, as soon as you asked your question, I ran out and created a new slide and inserted it in there. For a show of hands, for those of you who aren't bashful, and for those of you who are saying to yourself, who are not saying to yourself, why am I here? What's going on here? How many of you have donated blood before in the last year? Actually, let me back it up. How many of you donated blood before? All right, see a lot of hands here. How many of you have donated in the last year? Okay, and how many of you have donated in the last month? All right, excellent. Thank you very much. So you can see what's happening. 5% of the population are giving in any particular year. Many of us have given at some point in our lifetime, but if you look at regularity, it goes down very quickly. Those who have given in the last month, that's fantastic, and even in the last year, that's fantastic as well. Who here has never donated blood? It's not the kind of question you answer very generously. Oh, that's great. Look at that. You folks have your hands up. So here's my question to you. Why? And if you're comfortable shouting out an answer to me, just shout out an answer to me. Not 17 yet. You can donate at 16 in Ohio. I'll just say that. All right, so you may not be eligible. So there's some reasons, for medical reasons, that you're not a potential blood donor. Anemia as well? Can't sit still. It's expecting too much of you to sit there for the amount of time involved. Uh-huh. What about needles? Scared of needles, so your kind of word cloud's coming up a little bit for you. Thank you. Yes? So there's medications that might make you ineligible. I should point out for those of you, because I'm repeating what you're saying, most medications that you could be taking will not make you ineligible, okay? So there are some that will, but most will not. So don't be discouraged if you're taking some meds. You might want to try or ask. Go online and see. The reality is the surveys or the analyses of our population show about 38% of us are eligible. All right? So if you think about it, that's quite a small segment of those, the whole population, are actually eligible when you take into account age, weight, prior experience. There's other restrictions as well. If you lived in England for a period of time when you might have been exposed to mad cow, you're not eligible to give blood. There's all sorts of things that can knock you out of the pool. But that means that the rest of us who are eligible, I think there's more of a burden that we have to realize that we have to pick up the pace, if you will. But we did hear some things that relate to the word cloud. And I want to show you this video clip that relates to the kind of work that I do to set this up for you. I'm going to have to hold the microphone to the computer, unfortunately. Let's see if the sound works okay. That's perfect. I'm going to pause this. A little technical help. Is the technical help still around? We got no volume. Is that why? Yep. All right. I think I got a maximum now. Let's try that again.
I am about to give blood. The gift of everlasting life. The transfer of my bodily fluids. No. Wow, that's a big needle.
You're gonna need to lie down right over here.
Okay. Hello.
Hi, I can't talk right now, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Whew, I'm really nervous.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. When I get nervous, I sort of clam up.
Oh, well, that's fine.
Oh, it's better for me just to be quiet.
Yeah.
Hi.
Can I point something out to you?
Sure.
You're actually talking a lot.
Yeah. Sorry, it's the other thing I do when I get really nervous.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, God.
Just relax.
Yep, I'm good. Ooh. Wow. I feel like a human juice box.
Oh, God.
Hawaiian blood punch.
Oh, that's gross.
Type ocean spray.
Come on, stop. Stop it.
Yeah.
What?
I looked at the bag. I looked straight at the bag.
That's not good.
Could you distract me for a second? Just talk about things that don't have blood in them.
Well, okay. Bags.
What?
All right, that was bad.
That was mean.
A hat.
A hat.
A hat with no blood in it.
That is full of soup.
You're cute.
What?
You're done.
Oh, already?
Oh, we did it.
Ooh, wow, I was so nervous about this. I don't think I ate for 3 days.
Is he okay?
All right. Oh, please turn me down. Thank you. All right, so this is the kind of depiction, if you get blood donation depicted in the media at any time, this is usually the kind of depiction you get. And so if you think about the word cloud that we saw previously and the types of folks that we're trying to get them to think about giving blood and the kinds of word cloud, the fears that they have, and then this is what you're seeing in the media. On one hand, you might think it's no wonder they have those kind of fears. On the other hand, it's not helping those fears at all. So this is depicting, actually, if you do a survey of people who are, you ask them about their interest in giving blood and the reasons why or why not, one of the top things that comes up on the list for both donors and non-donors, the thing they're concerned about, is syncopal and pre-syncopal reactions. And that's what Michael was illustrating here in the video, and I'm going to describe what those are. So syncopal, or syncope, is fainting. Pre-syncopal reactions are the things that are related to that, are kind of prodromal symptoms of that, feeling faint, dizzy, lightheaded, weak. And those are telling you that you might be on your way to having a faint reaction, but you may not as well. And those types of reactions account for about 3/4 of all the reactions that can occur, the 3/4 of complications that occur in the context of blood donation. All right, so this little pie chart here is showing you for a couple of $1 million, a million donors, the Red Cross, these are data from the Red Cross showing that about 75% of all reactions that occur in the donation context are of the pre-syncopal nature, feeling faint, dizzy, lightheaded, et cetera. The next most common reaction is a short loss of consciousness, which would be a loss of consciousness for less than 30 seconds. The likelihood of having this kind of reaction varies by a number of factors. So for example, if you are a first-time donor, you're more likely to have such a reaction. If you are light, in a smaller donor, you're more likely to have those kinds of reaction. The reason being that we take the same amount of blood out of every donor, 450 mils, so regardless of your body size. If you're smaller, proportionally more blood is being drawn than if you're a larger donor, so it increases the risk for reaction. And novice donors, young novice donors are at greater risk. The idea, the thought of having these kind of reactions is anxiety-provoking for both donors and non-donors. Not surprisingly, it's more anxiety-provoking for somebody who's never given before. And the interesting thing from a psychological perspective is that if you ask people about their risk of having this type of reaction, 87% of donors and non-donors overestimate the likelihood of this happening to them. They think it's much more likely than it is, and probably because of the media portrayals that I just gave you an example of. So the problem with this thinking that it's going to happen, that the risk is overestimated, is that the fear that people have about this is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'm going to show you data that we collected. This is with the Kansas City Community Blood Center. We did this with those folks a couple of times. We did a community drive and a high school drive. And we asked at the health screening, when you first go in to give blood, you do a health screening with a nurse. And they ask you a number of questions about your health. But we asked them if they could add on one question. We asked them, could you ask this question, how afraid are you of having blood drawn from your arm? And I really got to thank the Community Blood Center of Kansas City for allowing us to do this study, because most blood collection agencies do not want to ask this question. You know, if you ask that question, right? And I'll get back to that in a second. But anyway, they allow us to ask this question. And this is what we got for high school donors, a distribution of fear. So you can see here, not at all afraid. We have a little more than 50% are reporting that they're not all afraid. Somewhat afraid, we have a little more than 30% are saying they're somewhat afraid, and then moderately afraid goes down a little bit, very afraid, and extremely afraid. I don't know why those folks are giving blood. They're extremely afraid of needles, but they're giving blood anyway, so I guess more power to them. But about half, a little less than half of this whole sample who are volunteered to give blood in high school are reporting some level of fear of having blood drawn. Why is that important? This graph is showing you the relationship between their reported fear and their likelihood of having the types of reactions I just described, presyncopal or syncopal reactions. So somebody who said they were not at all afraid in the high school sample were reacting at about 11-12% of them were having these kind of reactions. If they said they were somewhat afraid, then the odds of having those reactions were a little more than twice. If they said that they were moderately afraid or very afraid, their odds go up to a little bit more than 3 times. And if you can see this, poor folks who are extremely afraid, almost 6 times the odds of having those reactions. So what you report as your fear is related to the risk of you having those kind of reactions. Fear is related to that. And we followed this group of high school donors up for the next year to see if they came back to give blood again. And this graph is called a survival curve. And these lines represent what's happening to these groups over time, so over the next year. And this, a 0 would mean that none of these folks came back, 0% came back. A 1 would mean 100% of those folks came back. And so if I interpret this for you, this top line is people who said they were not afraid and had no reaction. They're coming back at about a rate of about 60% of them. So about 60% of high school donors who say they're not afraid and don't have a reaction will do it again next year. And conversely, those who were afraid, said they were afraid and had a reaction, are coming back about half that rate. About 30% of them showed up again the next year to give blood. And in between there are people who either had fear and no reaction or had a reaction and no fear. So both fear and the experience of reactions reduce the likelihood of folks coming back to give again. And when you put them together, they really reduce the risk of the likelihood of coming back again. So I get back to this question, this issue of why I'm so happy the Community Blood Center let us do this in Kansas City. They were worried that if you asked the question about how afraid are you having blood drawn from your arm just before you give blood, that we're going to induce it, right? That's what they're worried that's going to happen. And so that's a legitimate question. And so we said to them, what we're going to do is half of this sample, so about 1,700 of the donors, we're going to ask the question. And about 1,700 of the donors, we won't ask the question. Let's see what the risk of reactions is. So across the board, those who were asked the question had reactions 17.2% of the time, and those who weren't, it was 17.7%. From a statistical point of view, that's not different. It doesn't matter if you ask the question. It's a little bit higher, in fact, if we didn't ask the question, but statistically it's not different. And we've done this now in high schools, we've done it in community samples. If you ask the question, it doesn't produce a reaction, but it will predict a reaction. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to show you the model that we use to try and understand from a psychological and physiological perspective what's contributing to the experience of these reactions. Why are people having these reactions in a donation context? And this is our model, and I'm going to walk you through it, starting from the bottom. So here's, the bottom is presyncopal or syncopal reaction. So you have a reaction. The thing that is most proximally determining whether you have a reaction is the amount of oxygenated blood flowing to your brain. If you experience a drop in oxygenation of blood that's flowing to your brain, you will start to experience symptoms like feeling faint, dizzy, lightheaded. If it's too low, if it drops too much, you will faint. All right? And that in turn is determined by blood pressure. So as blood pressure gets too low, your oxygenated blood going to the brain will get too low and you will experience these symptoms and maybe faint. All right? I always stop here and do a public service announcement for people. This reaction, blood pressure dropping, blood flow decreasing, and you have this faint reaction, that's actually very adaptive. Your body's a smart thing. Your body knows that if you are standing upright, that it's forcing blood against gravity up towards the head. It's doing some serious work to get blood up to the head. And if you're having a hard time oxygenating the brain, one way to do that much more efficiently is to make you collapse so you're flat, and then blood will passively flow to your brain, which is where you need your blood, right? If anywhere else, you need it in your brain. So it's a very adaptive response. The problem, of course, being on the way down, you may hurt yourself, right? So the problem is the risk of injury associated with that. So my public service announcement is, if you are ever with somebody who looks like getting a little light color to, they look like they're feeling faint or dizzy, or they tell you that, what we're not supposed to do is try and catch them, all right? Because somebody, when they start to have a faint reaction, are literally dead weight. They are not going, their muscle tonus is gone, and they are going to fall. So they are going to feel like whatever they weigh when you try and catch them. And most of us, you know, if I'm about 190 pounds. If you tried to catch me when I fall, a sudden 190 pounds, you're probably not going to do it, and you may injure yourself in the process. So you're going to fall, hurt your back, and fall on me, and I'm going to hit my head, and we're both going to hit our head. Something bad's going to happen. Here's what you're supposed to do. You are supposed to allow the person to fall, and you protect their head. All right? So on the way down, you cradle their head so that they don't hurt themselves on the way down with their head. That's what you're trying to do. They will recover spontaneously from that, and everybody will be safe. End of public service announcement. So decrease in blood pressure, where is that coming from? There are a couple of things that contribute to that decrease in blood pressure. One of them, as we just described, was fear and anxiety. Fear and anxiety will produce a lot of autonomic nervous system changes that can contribute to a decrease in blood pressure. Another one is the blood draw itself. You are losing, as we talked about, a little more than 450 mils of blood when you give blood, and therefore that's going to, in and of itself, decrease your blood pressure. And lastly, there's a postural change that's going on. So you are seated in a semi-recumbent position when you're giving blood, and then after that, you've been there for maybe 15, 20 minutes, you suddenly stand up. That's an orthostatic challenge for the body. The blood is shifted to the lower legs, equivalent of about a unit of blood, about 450 to 500 mils have shifted to the lower legs, and now that also has to get back up to the heart to get back up to your brain. That's a significant challenge for the body, and different people can adapt to that with different abilities. So you have all these three things going on in the context of blood donation that can all contribute to feeling these symptoms. And what I'm going to talk to you about is interventions that we tested and tried out in the blood donation context to try and address each of these. And the first one I'm going to talk about is using distraction techniques to try and address the fear and anxiety. And then I'm going to talk about fluid loading with simple water to try and address the blood draw, the blood volume changes. And then lastly, a technique known as applied muscle tension or tensing to try and address the venous pooling. And so I'll go through those in turn. So the first one is this distraction idea. So these are, if you're thinking about giving blood and you want it, you should be paying attention to these strategies. So the first one is distraction. Why do we try distraction? Well, distraction is commonly used in medical and dental settings. You know, if you're at the dentist and the dentist is talking to you you have your mouth full of stuff and the dentist is still trying to talk to you, and you're thinking, why is he or she doing this? They can't understand me. Well, they're trying to carry on a conversation to distract you from the procedures that are going on. That also happens in medical settings, and it's going on in blood donation settings already. So a good phlebotomist will talk to the donor, try and keep them engaged. If they're a humorous person, they'll try and use humor, so you're not thinking about the donation. Your mind is somewhere else to distract you. So what we said was we're going to try a much more objective, standardized approach to this, and we're going to use this headset that presents three-dimensional videos and has an audio track associated with it to donors to see if that kind of distraction will make their experience any better. And so we had donors either have this headset or we had donors give blood without the headset. And we measured before they gave blood whether they were a monitor or a blunter. Now, you may not be familiar with this construct. This is a psychological construct. It has to do with how you tend to cope with acute stressors. And I'm going to help you understand whether you are a monitor or a blunter. Imagine you're going to give blood, and you go and sit down in the chair. And are you the kind of person that when the nurse or the phlebotomist comes up and they start to prepare your arm, are you the kind of person that's going to watch what she's doing with the iodine or he's doing with the iodine? You're going to ask questions of what's next, what's the needle, can I see the needle? I'm going to watch the needle go in, I'm going to watch the blood flow to the bag, etc. If you're that kind of person, you're a monitor. You want to pay attention to stressors, get as much information as you can, and that helps you cope. If you're the kind of person that says, okay, take the blood, tell me when it's done, and you're looking away, you don't want to see the blood, you're a blunter. Your preferred way of coping with this acute stress is to ignore it, distract yourself from it, and that's going to make you feel better. And we tend to be consistent across different kinds of stressors. So we measured that because, as you can imagine, sticking a headset on people so that they can't see, they're watching this 3D video and they have ear sets on, that's going to probably be a preferred strategy for a blunter, not for a monitor. So we knew that ahead of time. And then we measured their reactions at post-donation. So after you give blood, you go to the canteen, perfect opportunity for us to ask what kind of symptoms people were having. And we use this scale to ask about their symptoms. It's the blood donation reactions inventory. It asks you to fill out, did you feel faint, dizzy, lightheaded, all the symptoms that are associated with pre-syncopal and syncopal reactions. So you just fill out that scale. All right, here are the results for that study. Yes, we have a question.
Are blunters or monitors more common?
Which one's more common? The literature will tell you that they're equally common. In our hands in my lab, we tend to get a lot of blunters. So when we do these studies, we're surprised by how many people, we tend to get an overproportion of blunters. But the literature will tell you it's about equal. Okay, so here are the results for this study. This is the blunter group. This is their score on that scale, and you can see it's in log units. I transform it into log units because the distribution is not normal. I won't get into that, don't worry about it. The point being that people who didn't get the headset were significantly more likely to have these symptoms than people who did get the headset when they were blunters. It helped them reduce their reactions by being distracted by something else. People who were monitors who prefer to watch and pay attention to it In fact, this was not significantly different. It was a small sample, about 114 people, I believe it was. If this was, say, 10,000 donors, then this would be significantly different. And putting the headset on those folks would make their situation worse, right? So the take-home message from this is distraction could be a very effective strategy at reducing these reactions, but it has to depend on the individual's preferred coping style. You want them to choose. And this will come up again as we talk a little bit more. All right, acute water loading. So taking in water. I see some water bottles around here. Many people don't realize if you take in water, you just consume a regular bottle of water, that you are actually producing an acute increase in your vascular resistance and hence your blood pressure that lasts for about 60 minutes. Short-term increase in blood pressure that happens. The peak is around 15 to 30 minutes. So what we did was we said to the Red Cross, we were working with the Central Ohio Region Red Cross on this study, we said, you know, everybody gets these fluids after donating. They go to the canteen and we give them a bottle of water and all that kind of stuff. How about we just give them the water before they give? Because we have this theory, based on a whole bunch of physiology literature, that that should help increase their blood pressure and maybe help prevent reactions. They said, sure, let's give it a try. We gave them bottles of water to one group 30 minutes before, for first-time donors in this case, and another group, they didn't get any water. And then we measured those reactions as we described in the other study. This is what we found. For both male and female donors, drinking a bottle of water, in this case 30 minutes before you gave blood, reduced the reaction rate in about half. All right, so simple, same, doesn't cost any more because that fluid's already available, is on site, but drink it right before you get in the chair. And this is also a relatively small study. One of my graduate students did this for her master's thesis. And so I like to point out the fact that this was then replicated by Bruce Newman, who's a physician with the American Red Cross in Detroit. He replicated this with about 9,000 high school donors and showed that in this very large group of high school donors, he got the same effect. And in fact, he found that if he gives the water a little closer to the time before you get in the chair, about 10 to 15 minutes, it's even more effective. And very recently, it was replicated by a group in, I believe this was Belgium, and they got the same effect using fruit juice. All right, the last one I wanted to talk about in terms of these interventions is something known as applied muscle tension. And what this is, you can see in the upper left-hand corner, if you can see that he's actually engaging in applied muscle tension right now. It's just rhythmically contracting and relaxing the large skeletal muscles. It's ideal if your legs are crossed and you're squeezing them together. Every 5 seconds you squeeze them and you relax them. And what you're doing when you do that is you're enhancing venous return from the lower legs and wherever else you're squeezing, increasing blood pressure, increasing perfusion pressure, flow to the brain. And we didn't invent this. This has been used for a lot of years to treat people who have clinically recurrent fainting. It's been a strategy that's been taught to patients to use to help prevent and cope with fainting symptoms. And so we said, well, it makes sense that this should be something we should try in the donation context, very easy to teach. And so that's what we did. I'm going to show you two studies. I'm going to show you first a study where we looked at the physiology of this, and then I'll show you a study where we looked at the self-reported symptoms. So people are doing this activity, and I'm going to show you, we measured cerebral oxygenation using something called INVOS. It's a monitor of blood flow, oxygenated blood flow to the brain. It doesn't really require that you take the skull off, which is really useful. That's just an illustration of it. And I'm going to show you the results on this graph. And this graph is showing you changes in cerebral oxygenation from before donation, just immediately pre-donation, and to the first, second, and third of donation. And I've broken it down into thirds of donation because when you or I or somebody else gives blood, the amount of time it's going to take is going to differ from as low as maybe 7 minutes for somebody to maybe 15 minutes for somebody else. So it can't just be on a time. I did it on thirds for each individual donor. So one condition, what we had them do was sit in the chair, and we told them there's light's going to blink every 5 seconds, and every 5 seconds the light blinks, we want you to just flex your foot, and then the next 5 seconds flex the other foot. That's our distraction control condition. That won't produce any increase in blood flow to the brain because it's too small an activity, but it requires that they attend to the light and attend to their flexing, so it's a good distraction control condition. And this is what happens to these folks. During the first third of their donation, their oxygenated flow to the brain goes up by about 1%, and that's presumably because of the stress of having that needle stuck in, and it's just the beginning of the procedure, so there's a stress response. But during the blood draw, you can see it drops by a little more than 2% oxygenated levels, and by the end, you are below baseline levels by more than about 1.5% oxygenated blood is dropped, and that's because you've lost blood, right? So you've lost volume, and so the oxygenated blood getting to the brain has decreased. Let's compare that to the people who are doing this applied muscle tensing technique, tensing their legs and that kind of business. At the beginning, their blood flow, oxygenated blood flow, goes up as well. It goes up significantly more than these folks. Presumably it's the stress, but it's also the tension that they're doing is increasing blood flow. It goes down during donation just like it does for these folks, right, because they're losing blood. But by the end of the donation, they're significantly higher than these folks, and they're not different than their baseline. That's the key. It's essentially preserving oxygenated flow to the brain by engaging that muscle tensing technique. So that's the physiology of what's going on. What about the self-reported or the outcomes that we care about in terms of the reports by the individuals? I'm going to show you, we've done 5 different studies in all sorts of different blood centers around North America of this. I'm going to show the first study we did. This one was done in Montreal in Canada. And we had 3 groups. One group didn't get any treatment, they just donated as usual. The second group did this applied muscle tensing technique that I've just described to you. And then we had a third group where we had them do a placebo applied muscle tension technique. And the placebo was, we taught them the exact same technique, they watched the same video, learned it the same way. And then we said, we want you to do that when you get in the chair and then stop right before the needle goes in. So then they're expecting the same benefit of this, but the reality is most reactions, if they're going to occur, are going to occur towards the end of the donation when your oxygenated flow to the brain has gotten lowest, or when you first get up. That's the real peaks for these. So this isn't really going to help them. They don't know that, but it's really a placebo because it's not at a time when it's important. Then these folks all went on to give blood, and then we measured 3 things. The donation reaction score that I've talked to you about before, whether their chair was reclined by the phlebotomist. If you've given blood before, you've seen some people have these reactions, and the phlebotomist puts their head back, right? Again, to make the brain at the same level as the heart, so the blood passively flows back to the brain. So we see this as kind of an expert's opinion that this person had a reaction. And then the last group, did you get a full unit of blood out of these folks? Because if you have a reaction, they pull the needle out, and they won't get any more blood out of you. And what you probably don't know as a donor, if they don't get a full unit of blood out of you, they have to throw that away. If they only got 300 mils, they have to throw away that 300 mils. They have to get a full unit, so it's important if they get a full unit. All right, here's the results. If you looked across all of the participants here, men and women, there wasn't any significant difference. But when we looked just at women, the no treatment group and the placebo group were not different in terms of the reactions, but people who did muscle tensing, women who did muscle tensing, it cut their reactions in half. Worth pointing out here that the big difference here is that women are at significantly higher risk for these reactions because they are on average smaller than men, so they have more reactions than men. So we may not be getting any benefit in men because you can see they're having very low rates of reactions to start with. So they report less reactions. The phlebotomists are much less likely to have to recline the chair of women donors who are doing applied muscle tension. So you can see those who weren't doing it in both placebo group and the no treatment group, it's higher than 15%, and it's about 7%, a little less than half for those who are doing the applied muscle tension. And then the last one, and you're much more likely to get a full unit of blood out of somebody who's doing applied muscle tension or women. So it's about 96% of the time you get a full unit, and it's about 86% of the time for the other groups. So they report less reactions, they get their chair reclined less, and they get a full unit of blood more. So these are all good benefits of this. So I pause here and I ask this question, I say, you think it'd be helpful for current donors and prospective donors to know about this information? Think that'd be useful? Well, so do I. Otherwise I wouldn't be here. But I'm going to show you, despite that, I'm going to show you the types of advertising that we tend to use to try and recruit donors. We don't talk to them about this. We do other things. So let me show you an ad. It's not going to be as impactful because I have to hold the microphone here, but I'm going to do it anyway. Testing. Thank you. So you don't get the full impact there because the bass isn't in there. When the bass is on there, it's really impactful if you watch it on TV. This is a public service announcement that was used to recruit blood donors. And what I want you to do is put yourself in the word cloud of those who weren't going to give and they were frightened anxiety and scared and needles and fainting, and then you see this ad, and this is how we're trying to pull people in to give blood. From my perspective as a psychologist, it's not a good choice. So I'm going to talk to you about what I think is a good choice. And when we started this research, we were going way against the grain. All right, so blood collection agencies, if you look at the brochures and the advertisements they do, they tend to talk about, they give you testimonials, people who benefit from the blood. That's very good. They tell you about where the blood's going and how it's being used. That's very good. They steadfastly avoid talking about reactions, feeling faint, dizzy, weak, lightheaded, pain, fear of blood. They don't talk about those things because they're afraid that if they do, they're going to induce them. We took a different strategy. As a psychologist, I said, I know that if you can tell people about a stressor, especially if they know about it already, if you can give them coping strategies, if you can help them deal with it, that's going to be better than just let's not talk about it. That's not a very good strategy. So we started by developing this blood donation coping brochure. And I got a bunch of them here today, and I'm going to leave them here. If anybody cares, you can look at them later. Take one home with you. And I'm going to walk you through what we did here. So this is the first pages, and it talks, these first pages overlap kind of what's done in most brochures. So who does it help? So it talks about children and adults undergoing surgery, having cancer, et cetera, who will benefit from blood donation. Top 5 reasons for giving blood: to help others, feel good about yourself. Free refreshments, yay, it's a biggie for high school donors. What can I expect when I give blood? So this is, if you think about going to a stressful situation you've never been through before, think about a medical procedure. Do you want to know you want to know from your doctor what this procedure is going to entail? Probably. So similarly, for somebody who's about to give blood, it's helpful for them to know what it's going to entail. So we break it down for them. One of the things that's really important is they need to know that you're not going to get in and out of there in 10 minutes. It's going to take a period of time. You have to do the health screening, and you have to wait in the canteen afterwards, those kind of issues. But getting more to the point, what can you do at the blood drive to try and help you cope with this situation? So it says at the blood drive, there are things you can do before, during, and after to have a more pleasant experience or positive experience. Before you donate, you can distract yourself. It says, and this is really, this is not the thing that blood collection agencies normally want to talk about. The sight of needles or blood can make some people uncomfortable. For others, waiting to donate can seem boring. If you plan ahead, you can prevent both boredom and discomfort by bringing something to distract yourself. Listen to music, read, text, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on. Now, blood donation is a medical context. Most of us feel passive in medical contexts. We don't realize we have control and we can take control. And this is doing something different. It's saying you have control in this situation. There are a whole bunch of things you can do. If you're concerned about it, there are ways to distract yourself. Here are things you can do. It says drink fluids. When you donated blood, your body loses about 2 cups of fluid. This can lead to a drop in your blood pressure and make you feel dizzy or lightheaded. Oh my God, I'm talking about it. It's terrible. But people know, as we've shown already, people know about these reactions. It's not like they don't know. So we're saying it can happen, but then we say you can help prevent this by drinking water about 10 minutes before you donate. So we're talking about a way of coping. While you donate, again, distract yourself. Almost anything you can do to keep your mind busy while you sit quietly with one arm extended is okay. Tense your muscles. Here we talk about the muscle tensing procedure. One way to help prevent feeling dizzy or lightheaded while donating is the simple muscle tensing technique. It's as simple as 1, 2, 3. It talks about crossing your legs, tensing your muscles for 5 seconds, relaxing for 5 seconds, doing it again. Very simple to teach, very simple to learn. After you donate, drink more fluids to replace the fluid. And then we have 2 other ways of tensing your muscles. So if you feel lightheaded or dizzy, remember you can use the leg crossing technique, and you can't see it as well here, but it illustrates somebody sitting at a desk with their legs crossed underneath the desk. And the reason we did that was we were thinking specifically about high school donors who are going to be going back to their classrooms and may feel a little embarrassed about standing out. Kids in high school don't like to stand out, so we're showing them ways that they can do this technique so that nobody even knows that they're trying to cope with symptoms. And there's another one here that says you can kneel down or squat. Squatting is an awesome way to actually force that blood back towards the heart and towards the brain. And then this is a really important part of the brochure. We've tested it with and without, and we know that's an important part. It's talking about the personal experiences of a first-time donor who's using these techniques. They're acknowledging early on in the text that they were nervous about giving blood for the first time, and then they said they learned these strategies, and they talked about applying these strategies and talked about how it helped them to get through the donation process itself. In the psychology literature, the health psychology literature in particular, we know very well that if you're trying to get somebody to use a technique and a strategy, you do not want to teach it with an expert model. This would not work very well if you had somebody who said, I've given 10 gallons of blood in my lifetime, don't worry, it's no problem. That's not going to resonate with somebody who's nervous and never done it before. Somebody who's saying, I'm nervous, I'm doing it for the first time, that resonates, hearing what they did and how it worked for them. All right, so I'm going to show you a little bit of data on how this worked for us, this brochure. And this was a study we conducted here at Ohio University with undergraduates. And we measured their attitude towards donation, how much anxiety they had, how confident they were as giving blood and avoiding reactions, and their intention to give blood. And then we randomly assigned them to either read this brochure, read a standard American Red Cross brochure, which is a beautiful color brochure, but it didn't talk about any coping strategies or reactions, or a standard brochure put up by the National Institutes of Health about healthy eating. And then we repeated this assessment. And then this is the change that we got in each of these measures in these different groups. Percent change in attitude, anxiety, confidence, and intention. So if you look here, the new brochure produced a positive increase in attitude towards donation. So did the Red Cross brochure that talks about helping somebody. The reading about healthy eating doesn't make you more positive about donation, which you'd expect. Both the Red Cross brochure and our brochure reduced anxiety relative to this group. But here's the big effect. When you talk about these reactions and give people ways to cope, it significantly increases their confidence as a donor. The Red Cross brochure didn't do anything about somebody's confidence. It was no better than reading about healthy eating and exercise. And that translates directly into a greater intention to donate blood. And I show that here, but I also show this in the way in which we asked them whether they'd be willing to give. Before they left the lab, we said to them, there's going to be a couple of blood drives on campus over the next 2 weeks. It's not related to this study at all, but if you'd like to volunteer, we'd be happy to take your name and pass them along to the Red Cross. And we asked everybody who was leaving if they'd be willing to do that. And you can see these are the folks who read the standard Red Cross brochure. This is the healthy eating brochure. They said yes about 30% of the time and signed up, which is great. Appreciate that. But if they read the coping brochure, they were significantly more likely to sign up and decide to give blood on the spot there, so 44%. And we did what's called a mediation analysis, where we were able to demonstrate that the reason why they're willing to schedule that appointment is due to their increase in confidence that we saw. So you make them more confident, they're more likely to follow through on their behavior. You should be concerned that I didn't follow them around then to see if they went and gave blood, but I will show you that we actually did that in another study, and we did this in collaboration with the Australian Red Cross. They took our brochure and they translated it into Australian. They actually had to do a little bit of translating. Some of the words just didn't make sense, and they changed it a lot. So it's fun to read it, but obviously it looks very, very similar. And so they set up a mobile van. This is the University of Queensland in Australia. And they were approaching folks who were interested in being in the study who had never donated blood before. And they would, for those who said they were interested in being in the study and they had never volunteered to give blood before, they gave them one of two brochures. They gave them the standard Australian Red Cross brochure, which is a beautiful color brochure, talks nothing about coping strategies, or they gave them our adapted Australian version of our brochure, did the usual measurements about their attitudes, anxiety, confidence, and intention, but then the Australian Red Cross also followed up for us and said how many of those folks that are in each of those conditions then went on in the next 30 days to give blood. And the answer is that those who got the coping brochure volunteered or showed up 3.5 times more than the folks who read the other brochure. So it not only increases your confidence and intention, there's a significant follow-through that happens when you give this brochure. We did a mediation analysis. This was also driven by the confidence that was increased. And then I want to point out to you that I recognize that brochures are so 20th century, and we knew when we were making these that that wasn't necessarily the way to go forward in the long term, so we did web versions of this, as well as versions that run on smartphones and tablets. And the content is very similar, but it's a lot more dynamic and interactive. There's videos, etc. And these are some modules that exist for the videos, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to play these two here, but boy, I don't know how it's going to work through this microphone, but I'm going to do it anyway.
I'll admit it, I was really nervous the first time I donated blood. I didn't know how I was going to react to the whole situation. I knew I would get nervous once I got there. So I brought some music to listen to. It's good to have something to occupy your time, so you're not stressing out over the needles. Read, listen to music, text, do something to keep yourself busy. While I was in the donation chair, I texted my friends. They couldn't believe I was texting while giving blood. Before I knew it, the draw was done. I'll tell you, if you have something to do, it makes the time go by so much faster. But once you start to give blood, you may feel a little lightheaded. It's completely normal. I know what happened to me. There's a trick to avoiding it. You tense your leg muscles, cross your legs, squeeze them together. It helps get the blood back up to your head. I did this about every 10 seconds while donating, and it really helped.
Testing, testing. All right. So that gives you a sense of the kind of video modules they could look at. And in this study, we tested this on the web with our web version of it. And this study we did with all non-donors, people had never given before. Measured the usual suspects: attitude, anxiety, confidence, and intention. And then we randomly assigned them either to go through our website for 10 minutes. It only takes 10 minutes. Or we had them go through the American Red Cross's first-time donor website, which is a beautiful website, really well done. But I got to point out, again, it doesn't really address the issue of coping with these concerns that people have as well, I believe, as well as ours does. Or the group that we'd all want to be in, 10 minutes of playing on YouTube. All right, so that was our control condition. And then we assessed again their attitude, anxiety, confidence, and intention. And this is what we found. You can see attitude, significantly greater increase in positive attitude towards donating for those who did our website. It reduced anxiety actually even more than the Red Cross, but here's the main thing again. It significantly bolstered the confidence of these folks who to give blood and increase their intention. So again, we've translated this into a more accessible, easily accessible, cost-efficient way of doing it. It can play on phones, iPads, the whole deal. So the summary statement for this is, simple and effective coping strategies can be used to help reduce anxiety for donors. It can increase their confidence, and ideally, based on what we're seeing, it promotes a much more positive donation experience for these donors. And I want to pause at the end here. I want to just see if anybody, if you're interested in getting involved from the research perspective, I'd be happy to talk to you. Feel free to get in touch with me by email. Our lab, we're always doing new studies on this on campus and elsewhere. We work with blood collection agencies in the US and around the world, in fact. And if you want to get involved in blood donation, I certainly want to encourage you to consider that as well. And the easiest way to do that is to go to the Red Cross's website. You can get involved as a donor. You can get involved in hosting a drive. There's organizations on campus who host drives, and that's always encouraged. And you can volunteer for the Red Cross as well. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Two questions. One is, I hardly ever see advertising for blood donation. I hardly ever see that. Think about it.
Mhm.
The other question is, what in the world, what is the rate of, it's 5% in the US?
Mhm.
Have any statistics? Other parts?
Okay, so the two questions are, the first one's a statement, hardly ever see donation ads. And the question was, the rate in the US, I said, is about 5%. What is it in other parts of the world? I agree with your first statement. You don't see a lot of advertising. I think most advertising you see is by virtue of seeing mobile vans. And around here, I think we see them quite frequently, which is great. The budget for advertising is just, it's really not there. It's a very, there are nonprofit organizations who are collecting blood. By the way, it's not just the Red Cross. The Red Cross collects about 40% of the blood in this country, and other community blood centers and other blood centers collect the rest. They're on a very tight operating budget, and you're right, there's not a lot of advertising. What I showed you as examples of a PSA, these things tend to be public service announcements. The advertising time is provided for free. It tends to be aired on off times, right, late at night and things like that. It's very unfortunate, exactly. The second, 5%. 5% tends to be a number that you'll see around the world pretty commonly. It doesn't really get much higher than that. Some places it gets significantly lower than that. So it's a pretty common number that you'll see around the world. Yes? Is there an upper age limit for giving blood? In the U.S., the answer is no. Most agencies will take blood as long as you are healthy and able to give blood. So it's really about your health.
Because there was a study about a year or so ago about mice that were given blood from young mice.
Right.
And they were rejuvenated.
Right.
I wondered about the effect of old blood.
Right. So for those who didn't hear, there's some research coming out that transfusing young mice's blood to older mice will help them in various ways. And I've seen those data, and they're kind of interesting. And so the concern might be that we all want to be transfused with that good young blood. The reality is people are getting transfusions for emergency situations or surgeries or whatever. That blood is going to be in their system for a short period of time and going to do the job that they need, and then they're either going to get new transfusions or they're going to start to produce their own blood. So I think those mice or rat studies, I'm not sure what they are are probably kind of a different kind of chronic exposure situation. I don't know the answer to that, but it still does the job that we need it to do, the blood that we're getting from all ages. Yes?
Does drinking water beforehand dilute the blood at all, and would that make the collected blood less useful?
I'm glad you're thinking about a deep level about this. All right, so the question was, does drinking water beforehand dilute the blood and will it make it less useful? The answer is that the water is not going to get into the blood very much by the time they've collected it. So I was saying, the ideal is now about 10 to 15 minutes before blood donation. And that effect, although I'm talking about it as offsetting the volume drop that's occurring, it's actually not doing that by getting into the blood. What it's doing is it's stretching the stomach, and that produces a sympathetic reaction. Your body responds to a stretching of the stomach as if food is in there, and we need to have blood flow going, increasing blood flow to the stomach to help digest, etc. And it produces a short-term increase in blood pressure that happens to be beneficial, but it hasn't diluted the blood. If it had the diluted blood, and it might a little bit, that's still fine. It's going to be spun down. That'll be part of the plasma. You're still getting the red cells out of there and platelets, etc. So it's still a good product. Yes. Right. So is the Red Cross interested? If you go to I showed you the first time donor website, the National Red Cross's website, they've incorporated a lot of this. It's also the Australian Red Cross. We've done work with them. They've incorporated it big time. And then a lot of blood collection agencies, small blood centers across the country have used it. And some of them just use it. I've given permission. They just take it and whole cloth, they take it and they'll use it. So the Community Blood Center in Kansas City, some folks in Louisiana, I could just keep going on. So it's been used either in whole or in part in a lot of places. If you give blood with the Red Cross and you read the materials carefully that they gave you before you give blood, you'll see that they're encouraging some of these strategies now. I would say they're not doing it in the best way because they're just embedding it into that voluminous material you're supposed to read before you give blood. And we're working on that. But the answer is, yeah, it's really taking hold. And I've been really happy with the responsiveness of blood collection agencies. They care about these issues. They care about their donors. They want to make the experience as positive as possible. Yeah. Yes?
How did you come to focus on this as an area of research?
Interesting question. How did I get into this? How did psychologists, there's probably me and 5 other psychologists in the world who do this kind of work. It's kind of a strange little area to be in. The answer is I have 2 primary areas of research interest. The other one is pain research. And when I was in graduate school, one of my main foci was looking at pain in people at risk for hypertension. And most people don't know those with high blood pressure are less sensitive to pain. And my interest was, do people who are at risk for hypertension, are they also less sensitive to pain? Believing it was a genetic phenomenon. I've subsequently demonstrated that that's true, but one of the early studies that I did was I said to myself, I've shown this in the lab a bunch of times, where can I go in the real world where I can look at pain perception and measure blood pressure and find out about the family history? And I racked my brain for a few minutes and thought, blood donation, there's a good situation. These folks are very altruistic. They're probably willing to be in a study. We can get their blood pressure. We can ask them about their family history. And there's 2 types of pains that can go on. One is the finger prick. A lot of people don't like that, so we got some rating of pain there. And the other one is the needle going in for the arm. And we got ratings there. And sure enough, in that context, people are giving blood. If you have a family history of hypertension, you report the needle to be significantly less painful. So I was doing that, and at the same time, a clinical psychologist as well. At the same time, I was doing an internship working with people with a variety of different anxiety disorders, including blood and injury phobia. And for blood and injury phobia, what we do is we teach people to do this muscle tensing technique to try and cope with the blood and injury phobia. They tend to have these reactions, these fainting reactions. So when I was at that drive doing this study of this pain study, I was at high schools and colleges, I was seeing people faint. And I wasn't seeing any intervention to try and prevent it. And I knew very well from the clinical work that I was doing that we had strategies to prevent it. So I said, why is nobody doing this? And so that's what got me on this pathway that I've been doing now for 25 years to try and make this a more pleasant experience. Yes?
I was wondering, is there a shortage of blood, and if so, what sort of volume is it?
Is there a shortage of blood, and what is the volume of the deficit? The answer is, you got to be careful in how I give this answer. Overall, the supply is meeting demand right now. But I didn't go into blood types and all that kind of business. Blood types matter. So for example, O-negative blood, which many of us probably know as the universal donor. If you're an O-negative blood type, your blood can be transfused into anybody. Is always in short supply. Because it's a universal donor, it's the kind of blood that you can use, for example, in emergency situations when there's not time to blood type the individual recipient, you can give O-negative blood safely, right? So O-negative blood is always in short supply. AB positive platelets and plasma, always in short supply. Was always a need for it. So the answer is, on the whole, we're meeting supply, but there are subtypes that are very important. It's actually particularly important. Minority communities are underrepresented in the donor pool in many places in North America. And there can be specific blood types and matching that is important for minority donors that match better for other minority donors. So in specific communities, it can be very important to get blood supply up. So that's my complicated answer. So we are meeting supply on the whole, but there is always a constant need in particular subtypes. Yeah. Yes?
Why is it that if you don't have a complete unit of blood, that unit or that partial unit is like unusable?
Yeah, it's sad to hear, right? So the question is, why is a partial unit of blood thrown away? And the answer to that is the bag and all the equipment that's being used to collect a unit of blood have preservative in it, and that preservative is it's a certain amount that's anticipating 450 mils of blood in that bag. And if the unit isn't full, then there's going to be an imbalance in terms of the amount of preservative that's in the bag, and so you just can't use it by FDA regulations. And so unfortunately, that has to be discarded. Yes? What a great question. Is it better to drink water all day before you give, or just right before? It's a little more complicated to answer. I can answer it in the complicated way because I answered his question, which was the effect that I'm talking about preventing these reactions is a short-term effect of drinking water that expands the stomach. So that's good. That you want to do about 10 to 15 minutes before. If you further want to reduce your risk of having these kind of reactions, the day before, drink a lot of salty and eat a lot of salty foods. You want to get blood volume up, right? So you have a lot of soup or pretzels and chips and drink a lot of fluid. So getting fluid in to the bloodstream, so that's a different thing. You're trying to get that fluid in the bloodstream. You want salty fluids, right? So it's a little bit of a different thing. You can prepare yourself very well. And that's also true after the fact. So right after you've given, drinking salty fluids or whatever can be really helpful to replenish that fluid you've lost. Yes?
Seems like your results are counterintuitive, as you suggested throughout. If you alert someone to the difficulties or potential dangers of the procedure, you would assume they would be kind of turned off from attempting it. And yet your results seem to show that they're even more eager to do it. How do you account for that?
Right. So the question, for those who didn't hear, is in some ways it's counterintuitive. You talk about these things that people might turn people off, and on the other hand, it appears to make people more eager to give blood. How do I account for that? The way I account for that is that they're not doing that for everybody. Who we're reaching are the folks who, if you think about the word cloud perspective, they probably have some fear and concerns and anxiety. They're very specific. On the other hand, there's kind of ambivalence there because they know that giving blood is important. They want to help. They're altruistic. So they can see the positive side of it, but nobody's helped them with the negative side of things. So I think what we're doing is, for some people, we're tipping that balance. Where they're oh, good, here's something I can do. I've wanted to do this, but I've been a little concerned about it. But here's a way that I can actually maybe take care of that concern and do what I've been wanting to do. So I think we're working on ambivalence and tipping that balance in favor of giving.
Okay, one more question, and then I'll allow you guys just to go up and talk individually.
Yes?
One of your earlier graphs seemed to indicate that the muscle tensing technique causes an increase in uptake between men. Is that statistically significant?
No, it wasn't. So I'll repeat the question. So the graph that I showed you of muscle tensing in the male subgroup, it looked like it was increasing their reported reactions. That was not statistically significant. It's a very small rate of reactions in that particular sample. It tends to be when you look at men versus women. One slide I didn't show you was I pointed out that we've done this now in 5 different studies in different locations with different types of donors. We always get a positive benefit of the applied muscle tensing technique, but sometimes it's across the board in all donors, and sometimes it's in subsamples. I showed you today data where it was within women only. We have other data where it's within the novice donors, but not in the experienced donors. The issue is to get to the at-risk donor. And one of the studies that we're running now is looking at anticipating who's a greater risk person based on a variety of factors, including their fear. So providing this intervention for fearful donors, because that's the subgroup are much more likely to have this kind of reaction. But it didn't make it worse for men, if that's what you're asking, fortunately. Thank you.
One last question. After today's talk, how many people plan on donating blood this year?
Oh my goodness. peer pressure question. I would be doing that. All right. Thank you, Roxanne.
There are lots of opportunities on campus.
Thank you all for coming. I'd be happy to answer questions individually if you'd like.